Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. So we are great that we could start the event at like 10:05 and we're on time. So we are always developing, right? Moving on, today we are here with an conference where we will talk about development. As we know, we need to develop ourselves continuously to move forward. Thus, we welcome you all to DSIC 2024, the first Development Studies International Conference, Dhaka, that has been organized by Department of Development Studies, University of Dhaka, and the Daily Bonik Barta, and Citibank is the lead sponsor. Moving on, let me introduce myself. I'm Antara Chaudhary, the Master of Ceremony of the event. I have been given a great responsibility today to at least spell your name correctly so that I can do it properly. I can do this. I'm in front of the bright minds of the country and abroad. Do you understand the pressure I have at the moment? Can you please give me a round of applause to cheer me up? Perfect. So I'm learning, and I'll make sure that I represent Bangladesh in the near future as a Master of Ceremony, and that's my plan. However, that's my development plan. So this is an exam for me, right? Moving on. Today, now it's being professional. That's my work at the moment. I'm not going to talk about my development today only. So, the development and the Department of Development Studies at the University of Dhaka and the Daily Bonik Barta are proud to present the first Development Studies International Conference titled Navigating Development Pathways in Evolving Global Order that has been scheduled for May 6 and May 5 in 2024 at Pan Pacific Shonerga. You're all over here. We invite the academics, researchers, the practitioners, and the policymakers from around the world to contribute to the forthcoming international conference. So a key highlight of this conference is its special policy focus on Bangladesh, a rising economy in the global South region. We will explore how Bangladesh navigates contemporary challenges and leverages opportunities through insightful discussions involving top policymakers and development partners of the country. So can we have a round of applause for all of you? So participants over here can expect 4 plenaries, 9 technical sessions, and an interactive academic town hall. Additionally, students from across Bangladesh will showcase their projects through poster presentations and enriching the discourse with fresh perspective and ideas. So once again, before we begin the event, we would like to thank our sponsor for joining us in this transformative endeavor, contributing to a meaningful conversation, networking opportunities, and global visibility. By partnering with us, sponsors have demonstrated their commitment to sustainable development and corporate social responsibility while gaining thankful recognition at the prestigious international event. So I would like to name my sponsors first. So the platinum sponsor over here is Al Arafa Islami Bank, Mutual Trust Bank Limited, and Lanka Bangla, Prime Bank, IPDC Finance, Islamic Bank, Concagri, Air Asia, Envoy Textiles Limited. So can we have a round of applause for the sponsors who are working also for the development of our country, home and abroad. Moving on. Now I would like to call upon stage, ladies and gentlemen, for the welcome session. I would like to call upon stage Honorable Dhiren Hanif Mahmood, editor and publisher of the Daily Bonik Barta, for the welcome note. Can we have a round of applause once again? I'm just getting over the flow, so.
Good morning, everyone. I am very privileged here to welcome you all to the first Development Studies International Conference, DSIC 2024 today. We are delighted to have among us Dr. Shirin Sharmi Chaudhary, Honorable Speaker of the National Parliament, as Chief Guest of the first plenary session. Ms. Wasika Aisha Khan MP, Honorable State Minister of the Ministry of Finance, as a special guest. Thank you, Professor Dr. A.S.M. Maqsood Kamal, Vice Chancellor, University of Dhaka, and Chair of the session. I am profoundly grateful to Dr. Abdul Rauf Talukdar, Governor of Bangladesh Bank, for agreeing to join in the second plenary session as Chief Guest. Thanks to Dr. Atiur Rahman, former Governor of Bangladesh Bank, who will chair the session. I'm always thankful to Dr. Moshir Rahman, Honorable Economic Advisor to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, who graciously consented to be the Chief Guest of the plenary session 3. Thank you, Mr. M.D. Shahiduzzaman Sarkar, Honorable State Minister of the Ministry of Planning, for joining us as a special guest to join in the plenary session 3. I want to thank Mr. M.A. Mannan, Honorable Chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Ministry of Planning, who will preside over the session. I'm thankful to Dr. M.D. Mahbub Hossain, Cabinet Secretary, Cabinet Division, Government of Bangladesh, who will attend the concluding plenary session as Chief Guest. I'll mix a little Bengali and English, so allow me to, although it is an international conference, I'll literally speak about Bonik Barta. I'll be very brief and short. The daily Bonik Barta is an independent newspaper established in 2011 for the purpose of presenting the balanced coverage of events, facts, seek the truth, and of promoting the best interest of the Bangladesh. Trust of reader is essential to us. This is the fundamental of our growth. Bonik Barta has also a reputation for high-quality journalism and a strong commitment to the accuracy and integrity. We are honored to host such a, the distinguished policymaker, academic personalities, teachers, students, corporate leaders. This conference promises an engaging and enlightening experience for all of us. I'd like to warmly welcome our guest speakers and facilitators who have been generously agreed to share their expertise with us. Let us all take the advantage of this opportunity to grow and learn together. Now I little bit speak in Bengali. যে আমি ঢাকা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয় ডেভেলপমেন্ট স্টাডিজ ডিপার্টমেন্টকে বিশেষভাবে ধন্যবাদ জানাই এরকম একটা আন্তর্জাতিক আয়োজনে আমাদেরকে সাথে রাখার জন্য এবং টায়ারলেস প্রায় 2-3 মাসের কাজের পরে এরকম একটা ইন্টারন্যাশনাল কনফারেন্সের আয়োজন সম্ভব এবং আমাদেরকে বেছে নেওয়ার জন্য বিশেষ করে ঢাকা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের ভিসি আমরা ঢাকা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের সঙ্গে আরও কাজ করি নন ফিকশন বুক ফে এবং উই আর ভেরি অনার্ড যে উনি সবসময় বণিক বার্তার নাম শুনলেই রাজি হয়ে যান যে না বণিক বার্তার সঙ্গে যে কোনো কাজ করা যায় আর কি আমি সিটি ব্যাংকে বিশেষভাবে ধন্যবাদ জানাই আমরা যখন তাদেরকে অ্যাপ্রোচ করি এটার মধ্যে একটা দীর্ঘ টেকনিক্যাল সেশন আছে প্লেনারি সেশনের বাইরে কিন্তু শোনার সাথে সাথেই তারা রাজি হয়ে যান যে আমরা এটার সঙ্গে আছি আমরা উই আর ওয়ান অফ দ্য লিডিং ব্যাংক ইন দিস কান্ট্রি আমাদের প্রয়োজন এই ধরনের বড় উদ্যোগ ভালো উদ্যোগের সঙ্গে থাকা আরও অন্যান্য অনেকেই আমাদের সঙ্গে যুক্ত আছেন আসলে এই ধরনের একটা আয়োজনের জন্য অনেকের সহায়তা দরকার হয় সবাইকে আমি ধন্যবাদ জানাই for me allocation only 4 minutes so I want to fix it so we hope this conference will be a melting pot of ideas and open the windows for the future collaboration in creating a sustainable future for us all. I'd like to thank you all again for joining us today and hope to see you tomorrow as well. Thank you very much.
So, as I was saying, as a Master of Ceremony, it's a great job that I have got at the moment. So right now, I will be calling up Mr. Masroor Arifin, Managing Director and CEO of Citibank PLC.
Thank you. Good morning, Dewan Hanif bhai. Thank you for talking about Citibank. সবসময় ভালো উদ্যোগে থাকি, চেষ্টা করি থাকতে। এখানে অনেকেই সম্মানিত অতিথিবৃন্দ আছেন, মাননীয় স্পিকার মহোদয় আছেন, আমাদের মাননীয় অর্থ প্রতিমন্ত্রী আছেন, আমার আগের গভর্নর ডক্টর আতিউর রহমান আছেন, ওয়াজুদ মাহমুদ স্যার আছেন। সো আমি আর নাম মেনশন করছি না, আমার সময় সংক্ষিপ্ত। আমি দেশের একটা বড় ব্যাংকেরই এমডি, আপনারা সিটি ব্যাংকের কথা জানেন। IFC World Bank is one of our shareholders in the bank, and also at the American Express of the country, and one of the most reputed, profitable institutions. ভালো করছি দীর্ঘ বছর ধরেই। আমি এই ব্যাংকের 5 বছর আজকে সিইও। আমি অর্থনীতির ছাত্র নই, বাট এই জাতীয় সেমিনার কনফারেন্স আমাকে খুবই উদ্বুদ্ধ করে। মনে হয় যে এই আলোচনাগুলো শোনা উচিত, বোঝা উচিত, বিকজ অনেক ইস্যুজ আছে। আমরা ম্যাক্রো ইকোনমিক পারফরমেন্স অ্যাজ এ প্র্যাকটিশনার অলওয়েজ লক্ষ্য করতে হয় আমাদেরকে, আবার অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম ফিনান্সিয়াল স্টেবিলিটি অফ দ্য ইকোনমির দিকেও খেয়াল রাখতে হয়, বিকজ আমরা তো এই অর্থনীতিতেই ব্যবসা করে যাচ্ছি। সো এটা নিঃসন্দেহ যে এই টাইমে এখন যখন সিটি ব্যাংক নিয়ে অনেক কথা চলছে মার্জার অ্যাকুইজিশন বিষয়ে, স্বাভাবিক যে এখন মনে হয় যে ব্যাংকের কস্ট কমাই, এসব অনুষ্ঠানে স্পন্সরশিপ না করি, বাট অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম তখনই মনে হয় যে মেবি এটাই রাইট টাইম। আলোচনা হোক, আলোচনার মধ্যে থেকে বের হয়ে আসুক সমাধানগুলো, কি করতে হবে। তো ওই জায়গা থেকেই আপনারা জানেন যে রাইট নাও, মানে আমি ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডটা বললাম যে ওয়াই উই থট অফ স্পন্সারিং, এর আগেরটাও আমরা করেছি যে এত বড় একটা ইভেন্ট। অ্যাজ এ ব্যাংকার আমরা দেখছি যে জিডিপির টার্গেট ছিল যা আপ টু মার্চ 7.5-এর বিপরীতে 6% জিডিপি টার্গেট অ্যাচিভড হয়েছে। বাট যেটা আমাদেরকে বেশি বদার করে ব্যাংকারদেরকে, ইনফ্লেশন টার্গেট 7.5, but as of March it is 9.81 official data, but thing is more than 2% higher. But আবহাওয়াতে যেমন আমরা বলি রিয়েল ফিল বা feels like much more than 9.81, এবং ওই যে মানে বাজারে গেলে জিনিসপত্রের দাম বেশি, মাছ মাংসের দাম বেশি, বাড়ি ভাড়া বেশি, সব বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। তো আমরা তো বিজনেস করে আমাদের রিপেমেন্টটা লোন আসতে হয়। ইনফ্লেশন যদি চলতে থাকে অর্থনীতিতে, তাহলে এর ইম্প্যাক্ট তো সব দিকেই পড়ে। আমাদের কনজিউমার বিজনেসেও পড়ে, আমাদের মিল কারখানা ফ্যাক্টরিতেও মানুষ পণ্য কম আনে, আমরা ইম্পোর্ট কম করছি, ক্যাপিটাল মেশিনারিজ কম আসছে, এগুলোর পিছনে হয়তো এটাও কারণ একটা। সো আপনারা দেখতেই পাচ্ছেন যে আমি শিওর আজকে আলোচনা হবে, আমি ব্যাংকার বলেই বলছে যে ক্রেডিট গ্রোথ কমে যাচ্ছে। ক্রেডিট গ্রোথ আমরা একসময় ব্যাংকাররাই দেখতাম 13-14% ক্রেডিট গ্রোথ থাকতো। এবছর টার্গেট ছিল মাত্র 10%, আপ টু ফেব্রুয়ারি হয়েছে তার কাছাকাছি 9.9। সো ক্রেডিট গ্রোথটা কেন হচ্ছে না? তো এইগুলোই প্রশ্ন। বাট অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম ভালো কথা যে এক্সপোর্ট রাইট দিকেই যাচ্ছে। এক্সপোর্ট 9 মাসের টার্গেট ছিল 46.5 বিলিয়ন, আমরা করেছি 43.5 বিলিয়ন, অর্থাৎ রান রেট বেসিসে আমরা বার্ষিক টার্গেটের 93%-এ আছি। এটা ভালো জিনিস। আর একটা কথা হচ্ছে রেমিটেন্স, যা আমাদেরকে বাঁচাচ্ছে। ব্যাংকিং সেক্টর আমরা রেমিটেন্স আনছি, টার্গেট $22 বিলিয়ন ছিল বার্ষিক, 9 মাসের টার্গেট ছিল 16.5 বিলিয়ন, 9 মাসে এসছে 17 বিলিয়ন, অর্থাৎ 103.3%। So these are the two good things. ইম্পোর্টের ব্যাপারেই বলবো। এখানে আপনার অর্থনীতিবিদ এবং অর্থনীতি বিষয়ে মানে জানেন এরকম সবাই আছেন। ইম্পোর্ট আমাদের বার্ষিক টার্গেট ছিল $80 বিলিয়ন, 8 মাসে হয়েছে 53 বিলিয়ন, বাস্তবে হয়েছে 44 বিলিয়ন, 8 মাসের টার্গেট 53-র বদলে। অর্থাৎ ইম্পোর্ট কিন্তু টার্গেট 80 বিলিয়ন থেকে টার্গেট নামিয়ে আনা হয়েছে, সেখানে সেইটাও পুরোপুরি হয়নি। এটা আদৌ কি ভালো? এটার কারণই হচ্ছে ডলার বিষয়। আমরা কিন্তু রেমিটেন্স আনছি ঠিকই, আমরা ইম্পোর্টটাকে সামহাও কন্ট্রোল করছি। অর্থনীতি থেকে প্রচুর ওভার ইনভয়েসিং, আন্ডার ইনভয়েসিং চলে গেছে, এটা ভালো কথা। বাট এত বড় অর্থনীতির গ্রোথের জন্য আসলে ইম্পোর্ট, আমার তো মনে হয় যে মাসে 10 বিলিয়ন করে আমাদের টার্গেট হওয়া উচিত। $120 বিলিয়ন ইম্পোর্ট করা, সবই কানেক্টেড টু ইম্পোর্ট। ইম্পোর্ট থেকেই মাল তৈরি হয়, ইম্পোর্ট থেকেই এক্সপোর্ট হয়। তো এটার জন্যই আমাদের আসলে সাপ্লাই সাইড অফ থিংস অর্থাৎ ডলারের প্রবাহটা বাড়াতে হবে। ডলারের প্রবাহ বাড়ানোর জন্য আমি সার্টেন অ্যানোমালিজ বলি, যে ধরেন মানি সাপ্লাই সাইডে আমাদের ব্যাংকারদের কাছে প্রথম প্রশ্ন করেন আপনারা যে লিকুইডিটির কি অবস্থা। লিকুইডিটি কাগজে কলমে দেখাচ্ছে 1,60,000 কোটি টাকা সারপ্লাস লিকুইডিটি আছে মার্কেটে, বাট 95,000 কোটি টাকায় সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংকের দেওয়া। আমরা রেপো করে সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংক থেকে নিচ্ছি, সেন্ট্রাল ব্যাংক আবার ইসলামী ব্যাংকগুলোকে 15,000 কোটি দিয়েছে। তো আমরা যদি আগের লিকুইডিটির অবস্থাটা দেখি, এই 1,60,000 কোটি থেকে 95 বাদ দিলে থাকেই 60,000 কোটি, যেটা কিন্তু আসলে লিকুইডিটি হিসেবে এত বড় মার্কেটে অনেক কম। আপনারা যদি এর আগের বছরগুলো দেখেন, মার্কেটে কিন্তু লিকুইডিটির চাপটা আছে। তো এই লিকুইডিটির চাপ আছে, এরই মধ্যে আমরা যদি মানি সাপ্লাই ইস্যুতে দেখি, গত বছর থেকে টার্গেট ছিল 1.73% মানি সাপ্লাই বাড়বে, বাট মানি সাপ্লাই ফেব্রুয়ারি পর্যন্ত বেড়েছে 9.70%। তো আমরা গভর্নর স্যারকে এগুলিই বলি যে স্যার এগুলি অ্যানোমালি, এই অ্যানোমালিগুলোর জন্যই আসলে কাজ করতে হবে, বিকজ কন্ট্রাকশনের মনিটারি পলিসিতে 9.70% মানি সাপ্লাই বেড়েছে, সেটা তো একটা অ্যানোমালি। ঠিক তেমনি আমরা মনে করি যে ইন্টারেস্ট রেট যেটা আমাদের এখন স্মার্ট প্লাস X% একটা 6 মাসের ট্রেজারি বিল বন্ডের উপরে বলা হয়েছে হিসাবটা করতে, সাথে কিছু প্রিমিয়াম যোগ করে, আমরা ব্যাংকাররা মনে করি যে আসলে এটা মার্কেট ড্রিভেনই হওয়া উচিত। গুড নিউজ ইজ দ্যাট only recently we have been called by the honorable governor. আমরা মনে করছি, আমরা জানি, আমরা বিশ্বাস করি ইন্টারেস্ট রেটের ক্যাপ চলে যাচ্ছে, মার্কেট ড্রিভেন হচ্ছে। আমরা একইভাবে চাই ফরেন এক্সচেঞ্জ রেট, ডলার রেটটাও মার্কেট ড্রিভেন হোক। ইকোনমির ইমেন্স পসিবিলিটি, আমরাই তো এত কিছুর মধ্যে রেমিটেন্স তো এভাবেই আনছি। তো আমাদের ইম্পোর্টাররা কিন্তু 120 টাকা করেও ডলারে পে করতে রাজি। তো আমরা মনে করি এসব জায়গাগুলোতে মানে আমাদের ফান্ডামেন্টালি অর্থনীতির বিশাল এই চাপ, বিশাল এই সময়ে যেদিকে যাওয়ার কথা সেদিকেই যাক। আমরা কোনো একটা দিককে জোর করে আমরা কিছু না করে আমরা অর্থনীতির মতোই ডিমান্ড সাপ্লাই বেসিসেই ছেড়ে দেওয়ার চেষ্টা করি। আমার মনে হয় তাতেই আলটিমেট ইনফ্লেশন কন্ট্রোলের আসল হিসাবটা নিহিত। আর এখানে আমি প্রায় শেষ করে আনছি, সময় আর বেশি নিব না। আর ভালো একটা কথা যে এরই মধ্যে আমাদের এফএক্সে আমরা জানি যে ক্রলিং পেগ মেথড আসছে। আমরা আশা করি যে এই ক্রলিং পেগ মেথডে ফরেন এক্সচেঞ্জের ডলার টাকার রেটটা কত হবে তা আরও বাস্তবসম্মত হবে। এখন 110-110-এর জায়গায় ডলার চলছে, আমরা 109-এ কিনছি, 110-এ বিক্রি করছি, বাট আজকে 2 বছর ধরে ইন্টারব্যাংক ডলার মার্কেট বন্ধ। আমাদের যেটা ছিল প্রধান ডলারের সোর্স, যার উপরে ভিত্তি করে আমরা আসলে ইম্পোর্ট করতাম। আমরা দেশকে ভালোবাসি, আমরা ইম্পোর্টকে সাপোর্ট করতে চাই। প্রচুর মানুষ আছেন যারা ক্যাপিটাল মেশিনারি থেকে শুরু করে একটা সামান্য চায়না থেকে খেলনাও আনেন, এনে সংসারটা চালান। আমরা এই জিনিসগুলোতে চাই যে এমন একটা রেট আসুক যে রেটে আসলে স্টেবিলিটিটা আসবে, ফিনান্সিয়াল স্টেবিলিটি আসবে। রাইট সম্ভাবনা সবই আছে, সার্টেন পলিসি লেভেলে সার্টেন স্টেবিলিটির জন্য সার্টেন দিকেই আমাদেরকে যেতে হবে, চিন্তাগুলো সেদিকেই করতে হবে। এরকম সময় আমার শেষ করে আনছি, আমাদের অফশোর ব্যাংকিংয়ে ফিক্সড ডিপোজিট প্রোডাক্ট এসেছে। এটা বাংলাদেশের জন্য যুগান্তকারী বিষয়। আজকে মরিশাসের অর্থনীতি $13 বিলিয়ন, আজকে অফশোর ব্যাংকিংয়ে তাদের ডিপোজিট $800 বিলিয়ন। তারা সারা পৃথিবীর ডিপোজিটটা পাচ্ছে। আজকে অফশোর ব্যাংকিংয়ে আমাদের বাংলাদেশের লোন, আমরা ব্যাংকগুলো নেই, সিটি ব্যাংকেরই লোন $500 বিলিয়ন অফশোর ব্যাংকিংয়ে নিচ্ছে, নিয়ে ইম্পোর্টটা চালাচ্ছি, ইম্পোর্ট সাপোর্ট করছি। তো আমাদের অফশোর ব্যাংকিংয়ের ডিপোজিট কিন্তু কিছুই নেই। এখানে দুর্দান্ত একটা আইন এসছে, ট্যাক্স ফ্রি অফশোর ব্যাংকিংয়ের ডিপোজিট। এটা আমি মনে করি যে তৃতীয় ডলার সাপ্লাই সোর্স হবে। একসময় এটা এক্সপোর্টের পরেই সেকেন্ড সোর্স হবে, কারণ একসময় বাংলাদেশ উন্নত হবে, রেমিটেন্স এভাবে মানুষ বিদেশে গিয়ে কাজ করতে যাবে না, এইভাবে বিভিন্ন ম্যানুয়াল, বিভিন্ন আজে বাজে ধরনের লেবার, ওই শ্রম বাঙালি দিবে না, বাঙালি এখানেই ভালো থাকবে। আমরা সেই দিনেরই প্রত্যাশা করি। অফশোর ব্যাংকিং একটা ভালো জিনিস এসছে। আবার ক্যাশ ডলার ঘরে রাখার ব্যাপারে এটাও একটা নতুন আইন এসছে। RFCD ডলার আপনারা প্রতিটা ফরেন ট্রিপের এগেনস্টে 10,000 করে জমা দিতে পারেন। আমাদের সিটি ব্যাংকেই $17 মিলিয়ন এসছে। মানুষজন RFCD-তে প্রতিটা ফরেন ট্রিপের এগেনস্টে অ্যারাইভাল সিল দেখে 10,000 করে ডলার জমা দিচ্ছেন। এটাও সিস্টেমকে বিরাট সহায়তা করবে। অফশোর ব্যাংকিংয়েও আমরা অ্যাজ এ ব্যাংক ভালো এগিয়েছি। $19.3 মিলিয়ন চলে এসছে, বিভিন্ন জায়গা থেকে মানুষ পাঠাচ্ছেন। তো এই জিনিসগুলো ভালো। আমরা সবগুলি ব্যাংক এই মুহূর্তে সবাই মিলে, এমন ভয়াবহ দিনের কথাও মনে পড়ে গত বছর, আমরা প্রায় $700 মিলিয়ন আমাদের নেট ওপেন পজিশনে শর্টফলে ছিলাম। ভালো কথা যে আজকে সবগুলি ব্যাংক মিলে $500 মিলিয়ন পজিটিভ, অর্থাৎ এক্সচেঞ্জেবল ফরেন এক্সচেঞ্জ আছে ফর ইম্পোর্ট পেমেন্ট, উইচ ইজ গুড। এই জিনিসগুলো দারুণ ভালো দিকে যাচ্ছে। আমি পার্সোনালি মনে করি আমাদের কারেন্ট গভর্নর, হি ওয়ান্টস টু ডু লট অফ গুড থিংস, হি ইজ এ চেঞ্জ মেকার টাইপ অফ হিউম্যান বিইং। তাকে আমরা পার্সোনালি যেটুকু চিনি, আমরা এই শুধু তার কাছে আমাদের অনুরোধ থাকবে যে ফান্ড এবং অর্থ মন্ত্রণালয়ের বিজ্ঞ প্রতিমন্ত্রীও এখানে আছেন, আমাদের অ্যানোমালি যেগুলো আছে এগুলো চলে যাক। আমরা যদি কন্ট্রাকশনারি পলিসি দিয়ে যাই তাহলে কন্ট্রাকশনারি মেজারই আমরা নিই, এক্সপেনশনারিতে গেলে এক্সপেনশনারি মেজারই আমরা নিই। তো right time to talk about all this. I wish all the best to the conference. I think, inshallah, we are going to witness great debate, great arguments, যার মধ্যে থেকেই বেশ কিছু বিষয়ের আলটিমেট সমাধান উঠে আসবে। আপনারা সবাই এসছেন, সিটি ব্যাংক আবার তৃতীয়বারের মতো এই অনুষ্ঠান করতে পেরে আমরা গর্বিত, আনন্দিত। আপনাদের সকলকে এখানে আসার জন্য ধন্যবাদ। আর দেওয়ান হানিফ মাহমুদ, বনিক বার্তার এডিটর ও ফাউন্ডার, ওনাকে সশ্রদ্ধ সালাম আবার এই অনুষ্ঠান করার জন্য। থ্যাংক ইউ অল, থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you, Mashur Arifin, for your speech. We got a lot of insights on our financial situation of our country and how Citibank is working on the development of Bangladesh. Moving on, we are here to talk about development. As I said earlier, we need to navigate through our complexities in order to evolve. Thus, we are moving on to our sessions, as I said earlier. So the session title goes Navigating Through the Complexities of Evolving Global Order for Development Pathways. For the session, I would like to call upon stage our chief guest, Dr. Shirin Sharmin Chaudhary, MP, Honorable Speaker, National Parliament of Bangladesh. Can we have a round of applause? Then our special guest, Ms. Wasika Aisha Khan, MP, Honorable State Minister, Ministry of Finance of Bangladesh. Our session will be presided over by the chair, Professor Dr. A.S.M. Maksud Kamal, Vice Chancellor, University of Dhaka. And our distinguished panelist, Dr. Wahidun Mahmood, former advisory, caretaker government of Bangladesh, Dr. R.R. Ganzavot, Rector, International Institute of Social Studies, The Hague, Netherlands, Dr. Joe Devine, Associate Pro Vice Chancellor Research, University of Bath, UK, and Dr. Mustaq Khan, Professor, Department of Economics, SOAS, University of London, UK. Can we have a round of applause for all of our panelist members? I would request everyone to be on stage and take their distinguished seats. Meanwhile, I would like to call upon stage Honorable Rashid Al Mahmoud Titumir, Professor and Chairman, Department of Development Studies, University of Dhaka, and he will be the moderator of the session. And I will be giving all my responsibilities to Rashid Al Mahmoud Titumir, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the first Development Studies International Conference. We are pleased to have Honorable Speaker of Bangladesh National Parliament, Dr. Shirin Sharmin Chaudhuri, Ms. Waseka Aisha, State Minister of Finance, as special guest, and we are delighted to have Professor Dr. Maqsood Kamal to chair this session. And we are joined by Professor Waiduddin Mahmood, a distinguished economist who has also had the cap of being the minister in charge in the caretaker government of the Ministry of Finance. And we have amongst us Professor R. Ganjevoort, ISS Den Haag, Netherlands, Professor Joe Devine, and Dr. Mushtaq Khan. It's indeed a privilege to welcome you all in today's important conference. The Department of Development Studies is first of its kind in South Asia. And it's also has changed the course of the way we teach development studies in the world. It began with the understanding that we have to study development economics, or we have to study developing countries, or we have to study the way international development is shaping. But we begin by the way we see our peasants, our farmers, our workers. We are lucky to be at the confluence of Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna. We treat them as politics, economics, and sociology. And we treat development studies as if it's the Bay of Bengal. So it's not a study the way it has been decided in Occidental culture. It is something of indigenous origin, and we are proud to have the largest number of degree-giving institution in the world. And we have 24 qualified faculty members. So this is indeed a privilege for the University of Dhaka, which has played a key role in nation building. And as we advance to the University of Dhaka's journey to what our young colleagues would call 2.0, we would like to see how we can really contribute at the international level by joining, influencing the international discourse. I would not dare to present the theme as has been asked by the Master of Ceremony, because this is indeed a privilege for me to have the three generations here. On the podium, there are my teachers, and I am in between, and there are my students. So it's a unique privilege to understand and have that intergenerational dialogue. So when we talk about global order, are we talking about Schrodinger's cat? Is it dead or alive? Or Karl Popper would have said that if it is in cloud or in cloak, we are in indeterminate state. It's a state between the liquid and a solid form. We do not know. As we also are flooded with, as we were a very recent ago of the ending of history to that of ages. We see books, Age of Revolution, ages of unpeace, ages of strong man. But how do we want to look at it? That's quite challenging. And obviously, COVID-19 fortified the idea that everything is probabilistic. Even a maximum likelihood estimation may not give us a conclusive idea. So given that kind of a world, we are discussing this. And how do we want to define development studies, or for that matter, development policy, as we understand, given the history of Bangladesh, which has fought to have been a liberated country? The way we understand development policy is it of struggle and it's of aspiration. But obviously, development policies are rooted in economics, society, and politics. So there is an ongoing contradictions between aspirations and impositions. And that too is visible when we look at markets or states around the world. We see fragmentation and polarization. And we see the Lockean idea of social contract has become weakened. And we see also rise of the populism, hatred. We also see the rise of the Constitution being violated. As we navigate, we also see how the power has shaped the development discourse and how the political settlement defines as if that there is an alienation between the citizen and the state. And then when we move to understand, and we are told that the recovery that we have witnessed have taken the shape of a K-curve, which is widening inequality. Some countries are moving higher than the others. Some within the countries, there are disparities increasing at an exponential rate. Then we are faced with planetary crisis, climate change, besides widening inequality. We have the inspiration to have a greener, safer, intergenerational equity of the world that we want to live in. But unfortunately, that has not been there. We are plagued by conflicts, and we are subject to geopolitics and geoeconomics. And the way the institutions and both formal and informal are shaping, we are to ask ourselves whether the orthodoxies are tenable in this current world to navigate a development that we all aspire. The country, the planet that we want to live in. And we are also faced with the perennial debates about whether incentive works or we need to address structure. And then we are faced with artificial intelligence. We do not know. As I have said, Einstein would have laughed when we are talking about indeterminate status. But this is where we are. We are in a systemic fluidity. And then we are also having the decolonized state building, where constitutions carry fundamental principles of universal, healthcare, education. But the state is not bound to provide universal healthcare, social security, and education. So the debate is quite absent. And then in this world of uncertainty, we see there are hegemonizing tendencies. So these are the issues, and we are fortunate to have people who could shed light on those evolving areas. But the way I see it, and I will finish by that, is that scientific historiography could be a pointer. We are in Bangladesh, and geographies of Asia were connected by grain-based civilization. The recent find in Wari Boteshwar provides an interesting finding. We see Japonica rice, which tells us that there were diffusions. And as we understand, if we really look at the civilizations, we had that of grain-based civilization, and particularly of rice, which is least allergenic, which could provide food for a dense societies. But coming back to the Wari Boteshwar findings, that provides a pointer that not only that civilization was connected by monsoon winds, when in summer it was summer west, and in winter it was northeast, which has kept the shipping going across the areas. But it also points out that there is a future, and the future for which our millions have shed light, and Bangladesh could be the pivot to the Asia's rise, as the history indicates. With that note of optimism, may I now request Professor Mushtaq Khan, Department of Economics, University of London, to initiate the discussion.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to Dhaka University and to the organizers. Titumir has asked me to set the scene by giving a broad outline of how I see the changing global order and what it means for us, for development. And the way I look at this, there's a very close interdependence between the distribution of power, which I call the political settlement, governance, economics, and politics. At a very broad, if you look at the global situation, there is a massive change happening in the distribution of power. The Western countries, the United States and its allies, are declining in relative power compared to the East, to China, to Russia, to India, Brazil. And this change in the distribution of power is creating a lot of global conflicts. When the distribution of power changes, that is a moment of conflict. And we see these conflicts in Europe with the war in Ukraine. We see it in the Middle East. We see the challenges to the Western supremacy coming from many different directions. What does it mean for a developing country? I want to, because time is very short, I want to focus on one or two things. If you look at the flows of financing resources to developing countries, this has gone through a huge change in the last 20 years. And I'm not talking about Bangladesh, I'm talking about developing countries as a whole. Over the last 20 years, development assistance and soft lending from Western banks like the World Bank or the ADB, what are called IFIs, has been gradually declining in relative importance. And the flows of financing from the South, primarily from China, but also commercial lending from other sources, has been rapidly growing. This is part of the change in the global order. Okay? So if you look at the last 20 years, by 2020, FDI to developing countries, that is direct investment, a lot of it from countries like China, India, and other southern countries, is now almost 3.5 times bigger than development assistance. Remittances, we heard about that earlier, is now 3 times bigger than development assistance. This huge shift in flow has massive implications for our internal governance. Because in the past, when the money was coming from the World Bank, from Western organizations, the way Western countries saw how to recover their money that they're lending was to work on improving governance as the Western countries saw governance. So there was a lot of pressure on developing countries to improve what they called good governance. Good governance meaning rule of law, good governance meaning democracy, good governance meaning anti-corruption. And people like me argued for the last 20 years that the way in which the Western countries defined good governance was not implementable in developing countries. It was a failed strategy. And that strategy has not worked in any developing country successfully. So the idea that you will improve financial management by improving good governance, which came when the West was dominant, has now failed. Instead, what we have now is a mass of money coming from the South, primarily from China, but also from other countries. And these countries are not insisting on good governance as a precondition for their lending or as their strategy of recovering their money. This is a massive change. It's a change which has huge opportunities, but also huge risks. The huge opportunity is that developing countries are no longer subject to trying to enforce governance rules which are not suited to them. Right? The huge risk is that now it is up to us to make sure that this money that is coming in is properly used and can be repaid. So on the one hand, there is a massive opportunity. On the other hand, there is a massive risk. Now, what happens when you have access to a lot of credit, a lot of investment, and you are not under any kind of global pressure for governance? Then everything depends on your internal political settlement. Does your country have the capacity to manage these resources properly? And some countries are, and some countries are not. If you look at the last 15 to 20 years, growth in the South, including Bangladesh, has been largely driven by infrastructure investments. Massive amounts of money have come in infrastructure investments. Okay? But now, what happens with infrastructure investments if your governance is weak? Well, 2 or 3 things immediately happen. And we see it in many countries. I am not talking about Bangladesh. The first thing that can happen if your governance is weak is that the projects become overpriced. So you are, let's say, you are making a $100 road, but you are pricing it as $200. You are borrowing $200, you are making a $100 road, but you have to repay $200. So the $100 road might not generate the revenue to repay the $200. This is one problem. This is a governance problem. No one is now looking what we are doing. We have to do it ourselves. The second problem is, even when you are releasing the money for a $100 road, during implementation, another $50 might be leaving. So even the $100 road might not be made properly. The third problem is that when you have all of this money swilling around, you have a third problem, which is the problem of capital flight. Because people who have made this money now want to take the money and park it somewhere else which they think is safer. And that is the beginning of the hundi problem, that is the beginning of the banking problem, that is the beginning of all kinds of problems which comes from large amounts of money which is black. Now, this is a universal problem which has hit a large number of countries. So what we know is that in 2023, the UN reported that 52 developing countries are in serious debt trouble. 52. That is 40% of all developing countries are in serious debt trouble now. And it's all related to the kind of problems I'm talking about. In 2023, the World Bank reported that in 3 years, that is from 2020 to 2023, there were 18 sovereign debt defaults. 18, including Sri Lanka, one of them, South Asia. That is more than in the previous 30 years. So in 3 years, there have been 18 sovereign debt defaults, more than in the previous 30 years. So something is happening here. Okay? Now, when you have that kind of problem, we have to come back very seriously on issues of governance, but not the governance of the past, the good governance which doesn't work for us, but we have to ask, how do we improve the governance that we make the infrastructure at the lowest price of the highest quality, and we make sure that the revenue is generated to repay the debt? Here is a big problem, that a lot of developing countries think that China and South Korea and East Asia were authoritarian regimes. If we have an authoritarian regime, authoritarian simply means a strong leadership regime, we will be able to use this money properly and repay it. Actually, this is a very problematic and oversimplified understanding. Most authoritarian regimes are struggling. Look at the Rajapaksa government of Sri Lanka. It resulted in this debt default by building overpriced infrastructure and not being able to repay it. And then the Sri Lankan rupee has now gone to more than 300 per dollar. Once your slide starts, it's very difficult to stop that slide. Pakistan rupee is almost 200 to the dollar. Okay? Now, what is the difference between the Chinese form of governance and the Rajapaksa or other forms of governance which doesn't work? Very simply, when we talk about an authoritarian regime, you have to think of power both horizontally and vertically. Horizontal means that I can keep others from coming in and replacing me. This is horizontal power. Horizontal power means I can keep others out. I can stay in power. But horizontal power is not sufficient for governing finance. For governing finance, you need vertical power. Vertical power means the higher levels of the state can command lower levels or businesses, and it can enforce those rules. That doesn't need a good rule of law necessarily, but it needs a lot of vertical power. Now, what you find in China is that the state, or South Korea in the 1960s, there was very strong vertical power. People who got money had to deliver. If they didn't deliver, they were punished. What you find in weak autocracy, weak authoritarian regimes, is people who take the money and don't deliver, don't get punished. Now, when people waste money or take bank loans and the strong leadership is unable to punish it, then you have a serious problem. And I think that the discussion that we need to have in Bangladesh is how to persuade the government to take very strong actions, not through the courts and not through the rule of law, because as I said, we don't have a good rule of law. And that is the Western strategy. The Western strategy is you improve governance by first improving the rule of law. That doesn't work. But the Chinese way is you improve governance by taking direct action. In South Korea or in China, businesses or banks that did not perform were directly hauled up. The businesses were deprived of their assets. Assets were reallocated quickly. Capital flight was stopped by harsh action against those engaging in capital flight. It wasn't through a rule-based process, but it was an effective process. Now, if we don't have a good rules-based process, we must find direct, effective processes. We must take direct action to signal very strongly that people who are using illicit financing for hundi or taking money out illicitly or not repaying bank loans or wasting public money in overpriced infrastructure, some big individuals need to be identified and punished. If you look at China, if you look at South Korea, that is how they did it. They did not take people to court and waste 20 years prosecuting them. They quickly made corrections. Now, if we have abandoned the good governance route, and I repeat what I said earlier, the good governance, rule of law route does not work in developing countries, then we must try the direct action route. Because people are talking a lot about developmental states all over the developing world. In every country in Africa you go to, and I work in many African countries, many Asian countries, people are saying, look, the Western model doesn't work. We are now going to be developmental states. And I always explain to them, you do not understand what is a developmental state. A developmental state doesn't mean that I don't have democracy, I don't have a rule of law. That doesn't make you a developmental state. A developmental state is a state that has vertical power to enforce discipline on those who have public money. And you can impose this discipline outside of a rule of law, provided the political leadership has that interest and that capacity. I already said that 40% of developing countries are in trouble. That means 60% are not in trouble, right? We should try to be in the 60% that is not in trouble. And we have to stay out of that 18 countries that are already in sovereign default. I think Bangladesh can do it, but it requires the political leadership to immediately start taking some strong actions. And we all know what those strong actions are. And the countries that have been able to take strong actions have grown. This is a moment of opportunity. There is a lot of resources, but if we mismanage it, we can get into very serious trouble. So I'm just setting the scene for a long and, I think, fruitful discussion through the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Khan, for setting and coming up with provoking ideas. While he was abandoning the idea of good governance, he was emphasizing the idea of internal governance in a post-colonized state. And he comes up with two interesting notions. One is order and the other is discipline. And by that, he wants to see an effective action giving signal to the market so it delivers. Indeed, that theoretical feasibility he has come up with, and there are interesting ideas, particularly coming from Douglas North, who has talked a lot about limited access order and open access order, and why World Bank or IMF reform agenda doesn't work in developing countries. But having said that, what he says that in our trajectory, what we need is institutional ability to initiate public order. We'll have others to discuss on this. But now, as we look at it and as we are embarking on the critique of the way we look at everything, including where there are a lot of scholarship. Interestingly, we started from a jail, which is the idea of poverty. So now we have Professor Joe Devine, who would be looking at whether the way we think and the way we measure poverty or the way we understand accountability, including the digital era. So quite a kind of a switch between micro and an abstract normative idea. So I would really like to see and have a quite an open understanding from Professor Joe Devine, who has excelled in political sociology. As I said, that development studies, we are mindful of having an interdisciplinary understanding of development, and we equally value politics, economics, society, anthropology, and so on and so forth. So may I have the honor to invite Professor Joe Devine, who has worked also on Bangladesh and many other countries across the world. Professor Joe Devine, University of Barta.
Thank you, everyone. I'm really looking forward to this next 2 days. This kind of conference, I think, is really exciting, and I think it's the kind of thing that Dhaka University should be proud that it's taking a lead. I'm also privileged and honoured, of course, to be in the company of our chief and special guests, as well as our chair. Titimur kindly gave me a very broad remit, so I do what I normally do, which is just ignore it and then go on and do what I want to do. So my background basically is I'm much more ethnographic in the way that I work. Yeah? So expect that. What I want to do is two things basically. I want to try and draw on research that I've been doing recently in Bangladesh. It's going to be very small snippets, but I want to come at the end and put forward a challenge to development studies in Bangladesh. I don't think it's just for Bangladesh, this challenge. I think I come from a development studies background as well, and I think the same challenge exists in the United Kingdom and probably across the world. But I want to get to that last point, which is a challenge to where development studies might go. So let me start. When I saw the plenary title, what really struck me was the fact that in the same title there was something about global order and complexity. And I kind of thought, yes, I know the world is complex, but when we order things, we don't make them more complex. The process of ordering is to make things more simple. And as researchers, for example, we research complex things, and then when we write down our findings and analysis, the whole point is to make it simpler. So I was struck about this complexity and global order connection, and I'm going to try and make an argument that what we should be doing is trying to be more faithful to the complexities of the orders around us. So my work recently has been around extreme poverty, trying to make a distinction between the terminologies I don't like, but anyway, a distinction between extreme poverty and moderate poverty. And think about poverty generally as a good example of a global order. We've got the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. You've got countries in different league tables, whether it be low income, middle income, high income. So at one level, the way we think about poverty and where we situate ourselves in relation to poverty is a perfect example of a global order. My argument is going to be it's completely ignorant of the complexity of poverty. We're oversimplifying, and as a result, we may be walking down dangerous paths. So I won't go into where Bangladesh is in relation to poverty because you know it better than I do. Over the last few years, the trajectory in terms of formal poverty measurements has been outstanding. Yeah? And I think Bangladesh technically is close, very close to being a country where there is zero extreme poverty. I think once you get to 3%, you're technically in that realm. So it's been an outstanding success. It's also been accompanied by another success story, which has been around growth. Okay? So your GDP growth rates, my country are completely jealous of it. Okay? On the other hand, there are discussions about, I don't know, Bangladesh now entering into the future BRICS alliance. There's good discussions going forward about what Bangladesh, so it's a strong, powerful economy, especially in relation to many other countries in the world. Now, these two things go together. You're doing really well in poverty reduction formally, you've got a strong economy. This feeds perfectly well into another global mantra, which is that if we continue to grow economically, we will continue to reduce poverty. It's not true. It's never been true, and it won't be true. So we need to somehow make that story slightly more complex. So last week I was listening to a very distinguished Bangladesh economist who made a very, very good argument about the different growth rates and poverty reduction rates in Bangladesh, very comprehensive. And at the end, the discussant said what he favoured was a future poverty reduction strategy based on structural transformation, as opposed to a rights-based approach to poverty. So we don't need the rights-based one. What we need is a structural transformation-led poverty reduction strategy. And I got worried. I got worried about that. So let's try and unpack that. The second mantra that we've got globally, another mantra of the global order, is leaving no one behind. And Bangladesh is a perfect illustration of a successful strategy in trying to leave no one behind. Yeah? And it falls into and it feeds into that myth that somehow economic growth, if we can trickle it down more inclusively, then we will continue to reduce poverty. That's the basic story. So a few years ago, my university, with colleagues here in the room, we organized a conference, and we basically flew a kite. So we said, let's forget about leaving no one behind, and let's think about a different mantra. And that mantra was called sharing the well. And what we were worried about was that some of the poverty thresholds were just arithmetic calculations which were very accurate, but perhaps not a reflection of reality, on the one hand. And on the other hand, we were worried about this story that if we just keep growing economically, then poverty will automatically reduce. So we talked about sharing the well. And sharing the well asks a harder political economy question. And that question is, under conditions, for example, of growing inequality, something which is happening in Bangladesh, what as a society are we prepared to share? And to what extent are we prepared to share? Current resources and wealth, and future ones as well. So much more, in my view at least, a complicated and harder question. And we'll come back to that in terms of the challenge that development studies might face going forward. So then let me talk about extreme poverty, and it's going to be 3 very quick snippets of different kinds of research. And in a way, I hope that it gives a bit more detail of the vertical political settlement that Mushtaq was talking about. So the first was we've done work recently on this extreme poverty, and there was a report that we published with GED, so the Commission, and we talked about the way that poverty was distributed in the country and produced maps. At the time that we produced this, the World Bank had just come out saying that there was a significant east-west divide in Bangladesh. Okay? And that was based on HIES data. And we were looking at the same kind of data sources and looking at district level. And when you put those maps up, you started realizing that there was no east-west divide. What you have are pockets throughout Bangladesh of extreme poverty, and those pockets have been stagnant. They've been there for a long time. Okay? And in some districts in Bangladesh, the reduction in poverty has not only been slow, but some districts are getting poorer. Okay? So currently in Bangladesh, we've got this very low poverty rate officially, formally, but we've got districts in Bangladesh which are becoming poorer and becoming poorer quickly. Okay? So what you've got then is spatial disparities or geographical disparities behind, so a complexity, if you want, behind the simple story of poverty reduction. Underneath, geographically at least, we've got a much more complicated story. But let me then tell you a second one, which you already know. When you start looking at maps in Bangladesh of poverty and you look at head counts, so income-based poverty thresholds, or multidimensional poverty thresholds, the maps look completely different. Now, you would expect them to look different because you're asking different questions. But we all know that if we just ask about income, or if we just even ask about multidimensionality, that still doesn't capture what it means to be poor. It captures some aspect of it, but it's still a very narrow understanding of what poverty is all about. So here's the next one. If we look at HIES data, I haven't looked at the recent ones, so this is 2020. If you look at HIES data, at a national level, female-headed households are less poor than male-headed households. Households with disabilities are less poor than households that do have disability, that don't have disabilities. Completely counterintuitive. And you only start to see a reversal of this, in other words, female-headed households being poorer and households with disabilities being poorer, once you start coming away from the national data and start looking at district and Upazila data. Then you start to see the differences come out. So that tells me that the national data, the story we celebrate about the reduction of poverty, there's something not quite right about it. It's not telling a full story. Okay? So, that's the first one. And what's that telling me, that piece of research? That the thresholds that we currently use, although they're arithmetically very correct, they are completely arbitrary. And they may be misleading. And therefore we need to be careful in ensuring that we are faithful to a more complex story when we look at it. And indeed, a few years ago, Dr. Sadiq Ahmed had done some calculations, and he multiplied the upper poverty line by 1.25. And all of a sudden, 50% of the population in Bangladesh were either poor or vulnerable. And when he multiplied the upper poverty line by 1.5, 80% of Bangladesh was either poor or vulnerable. But of course, we don't measure vulnerability. We measure poverty lines, thresholds, arbitrary arithmetic calculations. And we haven't had the discussion yet about a national minimum living standard. If we start calculating different things, our maps will be very different. So that's the first one. But this story about, female-headed households, etc., going down to Upazila and local levels. So the second piece of work I want to talk to you about is life histories, which is completely qualitative. So I've been following 70 households now for 15 years. Many of them have done well, some have done very badly. And there's one in particular I went to visit in Shadkira 2 years ago with a colleague of mine. Her name is Zamila. And Zamila had done quite well in life, and then all of a sudden, for no reason, things fell apart. And when we were asking about her experience of poverty, the phrase that she used was the following: Amar Keoi Nai. And the reason I liked that phrase was because that was the phrase I heard when I did my doctoral research and really changed the way I started thinking about poverty. So what does it mean when someone tells us Amar Keoi Nai? I think it goes back to an extension of what Mushtaq was said, that at the local level, in her community level, the political arrangements, the social arrangements, are completely devoid of what I would think are traditional values familiar in Bangladesh, values of solidarity. They don't exist. No one in Bangladesh should have to say Amar Keoi Nai. No one. It's not in the spirit of your liberation. It's not in the spirit of the growth. It's not in the spirit that you celebrate today as a very successful country. And yet I think that although there are only 5.6% of the population who are extremely poor, I think there are more than 5.6% of the population who would tell me today, actually, Amar Keoi Nai. No care, no solidarity. And again, this goes against what I believe at least to be values which are inherent in the Bangladeshi Bengali culture. So, what happens in a situation of Amar Kiwi? What is mine by right, I can only get by favour. If someone else helped me, someone else stands in my favour, whether it be a guardian if I'm female, or whether it be some sort of patron if I'm poor. And Zamila is a case of someone where those principles of guardianship or kind, benevolent patronage has been completely destroyed. And so she's left literally on her own. So this idea of moving from a rights-based agenda to some other agenda where my rights are given to me, but as a favour, not as a right. That, I think, is a serious situation when we think about poverty. Number three, third piece of research, very recently looking at union digital centres, because the challenge in Bangladesh is, of course, if we can digitise everything, then we won't have these messy political arrangements locally which favour some people and don't favour others. Not true. So we looked at both Ghazipur, Khulna, with 6 research sites. In every single site, there is a group of people, not an individual, a group of people who are systematically excluded. It could be because of the garment workers. It could be because they're of a different ethnicity. It could be because they voted for a chairman in a different way in the last election. It doesn't matter. They are systematically excluded. So the idea that the digital can make things impersonal and therefore we will all get our rights because we're all equal citizens through the digital, that doesn't look to be holding true either. So those 3 pieces of research put me on the pessimist side of the world. 1 minute. And this is where I want to finish, which is this. When we think about leaving no one behind, which is a global mantra, what do we got? We have got an implicit agreement, and we're all part of that agreement, about absolute poverty. But we've not got an agreement about relative poverty. In other words, we think of welfare as something which is exercised as a charity and not as a right. And I think we need to start to thinking much more about rights, and instead of looking at the poor as either deserving charity or not deserving charity, we start to look at the causes of poverty and remove them. Very final word is this. There is a social scientist in Europe who talks about different kinds of knowledge, and this is the challenge to development studies. There's the epistemic knowledge, so what facts or data do we need to collect? And we're very good at that here. The second one is the technical knowledge. What works and how can we implement it? And again, in Bangladesh, we are better than good at that. But the third kind of knowledge is the kind of knowledge that very few of us get involved in, and it's called phronesis. It's a Greek word. And phronesis basically means the values. Yeah? So the phronesis question asks, where are you going and why? And I think that development studies' challenge going forward is to be a mirror in Bangladesh and ask society in Bangladesh to ask a very serious question, which is, where are you going and why? Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Finishing with both the ontological question and the epistemological question, it's really excellent, a kind of an ending to a very serious question. Yes, when the IMF managing director has to go to King's College to give a lecture, so she was referring to John Maynard Keynes' an essay to my grandchildren. And she was referring that Keynes thought that after 100 years, there would be an increase of living standard by 8 times. We are close to that. And then, when IMF is now doing a projection for next 100 years, and you, Joe, is so right, GDP is increasing by 13 times, while living standard is increasing by 3 times. So that speaks And that speaks of the complexity in terms of really what we do, what our masters ask to do on poverty research. And secondly, you bring an excellent idea about sympathy and the moral order that has really put Bangladesh forward through our community cohesion. Even in these days of, if you remember, Musti Chal. And then juxtaposing it with Amar Keu Nai, which is, and also about the idea of really looking at not about charity-based approach, rather a rights-based approach. So these are discerning issues, and obviously you talked about whether the discourse would ever move towards really addressing the moot question of sharing wealth beyond keeping it as a cliche or a rhetoric. Thank you for doing that, and as you rightly mentioned about the way we should be dealing with development studies, and you put forward challenges before us, and I'm sure we would be looking at. But again, coming back to Keynes, when Keynes was saying about that in the short run we are dead, that means he is asking that the policymakers must act so that we are not dead in short run, because there are all possibilities in the long run. So I would now request Ruard Ganjivort, who has really traveled in his colorful life of being a senator in Netherlands, then lived theology, and then has been a kind of a vice chancellor equivalent to a premier development studies institute in Den Haag. So he brings us a different perspective which are agitating in our minds in terms of both climate change as well as artificial intelligence, all those shocks and awes, as well as how do we live in a society that we all aspire to live, and the society that is, I don't know, I leave it to Professor Ruard Ganjivort, whether that's an utopia, he has to define it. Professor Ruard.
Thank you, Prof. Titomir, for this very kind introduction. And also thanks for the presence of the Honorable Dr. Shirin Sharmin Chaudhuri, the Honorable Ms. Vasika Aisha Khan, and the Honorable Professor Maksud Kamal. It's really a pleasure and also a privilege to be in here. I've been very much interested in the whole field of development from my youth when I lived in Suriname, South America. And ever since then I have had this connection. Even though I've never been to Bangladesh, I think many of the questions you are facing here are similar and related to questions and challenges elsewhere. And I hope to learn a lot from you on how this plays out in the particular context of Bangladesh. Now, I've been asked to speak also specifically on the question of what does this mean in the digital age, the complexities that Professor Titomir was speaking about. And I think Professor Joe Devine said, well, maybe we should make it simpler, but not too simple. So I think always the role of academics is to make life as complex as needed, and to our understanding to try to see what the patterns without even oversimplifying it indeed. So I want to talk about the development pathways in the digital age and the challenges that we see there. Now, of course, the first question would be then, what is precisely this digital age? We are all living in it, we are using it in many ways, and it does not surpass the physical age per se, but it just changes things. Some are speaking about the fourth industrial revolution. After the manufacturing revolution, the mobility revolution, then the third one can be called the robotization maybe, and then the fourth one would be the digital revolution or the AI revolution. And in a sense, that's just building on one another, but there are some fundamental challenges also, transforming our society. For my talk today, I encompass the, let's say, the very simple digital development to the very complex stages of AI. And the first thing to be aware of, I think, is that this is happening everywhere. It's not only happening in what we call developed countries or in developing, it's anywhere. It's transnational as well as local. The call centers in Asia, for example, targeting EU and USA, they do show that this is a transnational movement. It's also not only an urban movement, it's also happening in rural areas and bridging the rural and the urban. If you look at the effect of social media, my family-in-law is from Indonesia, and even living on the rural areas, everybody's on Facebook. So there's this international, transnational connection, this urban-rural connection that also overcomes some traditional distinctions. But we have to look at the specifics. Now, when it's so global and so broad in that sense, we cannot avoid the complexities. And I would like to understand these complexities as paradoxes. Paradoxes that are, let's say, they seem to be contradictions, but in fact there is an underlying issue at stake. And I want to discuss a few of these paradoxes today before moving to the question, how can we deal with that? How can we navigate those complexities? What does it mean for development? How will it affect the development aims that we have, whether it's national or economic, whether it's the more internationally defined sustainable development goals, whether it's Western-based, like what Professor Mustafa Khan was challenging, Western-based ideas of what development can be, or indigenous ideas about development. The question how we can navigate those complexities starts with the understanding, I think, of the paradoxes. I want to go through a few of these paradoxes with you. The first paradox to mention is what I would call the resource paradox. On the one hand, digitalization in its many forms allows for an efficiency that was unthought before. We can now sometimes simulate, we can predict all kinds of processes and try to analyze them before actually doing them. So instead of just the trial and error, which has cost us many billions of dollars in many ways, we can predict better what is efficient, how to offer the best healthcare, for example, how to offer the best impetus for economic development, and so on and so on. Avoiding unnecessary losses. And that has brought a huge amount of efficiency and of much better use of the funds that we have. But at the same time, and that's this resource paradox, digitalization, to start with, demands excessive amounts of energy. When we speak of the cloud as the somehow mythical idea where all our data can be stored, the cloud is not a mythical thing. The cloud is based on huge servers using excessive amounts of rare minerals and of energy to keep it going. It's very much a grounded thing, and it's taking up a lot of our resources. The rare minerals that are being used for our iPhones, for example, they create massive problems in the resource industry. And at the same time, this whole digitalization and all the abilities also for shopping online and what have you, they do create a consumption rat race and very complex supply chains, for example, in car production. Any car that you would see has been manufactured using elements coming from all over the world, which is only possible because of the digitalization behind it. So it has fastened and furthered an approach to consumption and production that is far from sustainable. So yes, it is effective on one hand and efficient, and it's far from efficient on a more global level, if you want. So that's the first paradox, the resource paradox. The second paradox I would call the data paradox. Because artificial intelligence and digitalization per se, they are based on the combination of data, huge amounts of data, and algorithms. And these two, they allow new insights into complex interactions. For example, the eco-social technological interactions. Some of my colleagues at the International Institute of Social Studies have worked on what they call the Atlas of Unburnable Oil. And what they did, they took geospatial information about oil reservoirs, combining it with vulnerable populations, and with maps of environmental risks. And by combining these three, they have produced an atlas that shows this is the oil that you could extract without too much environmental or social damage, but these are the parts that you should just leave in the earth. And that's only possible by combining these huge amounts of data. But the downside, if you want, of this paradox is that in datafication, as it can be called, we ourselves become data. There's this saying in social media, there's no such thing as a free software or a free app. When you don't pay for your app, it means that you are the currency that's being sold. Your data are being used by Facebook, by what have you. So at the same time that we become the data, we are being used by big tech companies. We are also increasingly unable to understand precisely how AI works. With machine learning, we don't know precisely what kind of connections, what kind of insights are being derived from the data. There's an interesting research in the Netherlands, and that's already quite old from before this really digital age, that shows that in those areas where we have more birds of certain kinds, there's also more babies. Now there's an old story that this specific bird, the stork, I'm not sure whether it's very cultural also in different countries, but the stork is the baby that brings it's the bird that brings a baby to a family. So whenever a baby was born, people would say the stork has arrived. Now, statistically, there are more storks in areas where more babies are being born. So you could say, data proof that this theory, that this old story is actually reality. But we all know correlation is not causation. So what does this mean? That on the one hand, data and algorithms become so important, they give us new insight, but we don't understand precisely how. You could say this is the Frankenstein fear. We are building a machine that we don't understand and that could take over our lives in the end. Or as Prof. Devine was saying, it may leave us out of the phronesis, of the wisdom, of the values that are fundamental. The problem of data. The third paradox is the knowledge paradox. We do have increased access to information, a democratization of knowledge, think of citizen journalism, citizen science, but also an increased impact of disinformation, the power of big tech, for example. And it's the main question whether states, whether governments will be able to manage that, will be able to control the power of big tech. There's a massive change going on in between the North and the South that Professor Moussa Khan was speaking about. And the philosopher historian Harari even says this might mean the end of democracy. What does it mean when actually the whole AI world, the computers, can predict human nature better than we can do it ourselves? Where are we going? What does this mean? And this knowledge paradox means that we have so much information, but much less wisdom and understanding. I have to move on for time reasons. The fourth one I would discuss is the community paradox. On the one hand, in the world, in the digital age, the transnational relations become much easier. ISS has around 50 alumni here in Bangladesh, and we can contact them easily through WhatsApp. These transnational relations were unheard of before, and they're quite possible now. But at the same time, as this broader community is growing, the polarization takes on new shapes and moves on faster and faster. Look at all the disinformation, look at, for example, the international responses to conflict like in Israel-Gaza, look at conspiracy theories as they are rising. How do we build communities of care and compassion in a world that's becoming more polarized? That's, I would say, the community paradox. The fifth one is related to this, is the visibility paradox. And that's especially an issue for minorities. On the one hand, minorities are getting access to support and to peers beyond their own area. And here I think, for example, of diaspora minorities, who can much more easily connect to their country of origin and their family and so on. But I also think of, for example, LGBT groups, who can feel isolated in their own context and feel connected to an international movement. But the same connection that they are allowed also creates a new vulnerability. A vulnerability to governments, to others. For example, political and cultural minorities are much more vulnerable if they become more visible. So how does this world in a how does this work in a digital age where everything becomes traceable and our identities online are going to play a major role? How does that play out in our freedom to exist? And this is a big discussion around, for example, the thinking and working on social credit systems. What does this mean for how we move around and the visibility? And the final one is the innovation or inequality paradox. On the one hand, platform industries, for example, allow innovations in job markets and products, but at the same time, it also can mean that traditional jobs are getting lost, that jobs are getting simplified or complexified, but that the middle range of jobs is getting lost. New generational gaps, new regional gaps, and the form of what you can call social Darwinism. So how to navigate that? Resource, data, knowledge, community, visibility, inequality. First of all, I would say let's be very critical of the intentions of digital companies. Their intention is not necessarily social development. Second, as a politician, I would say be careful not to expect too much from governments to be able to regulate properly, because the complexities are more than any government can handle. Third of all, we should work on empowering people through awareness raising, helping them understand what are these complexities and the risks involved. But maybe more importantly, what we do need to develop and what we should support is alternative, socially sensitive digital solutions in software, in social media, but also in financing, for example. Find new ways that do respect these paradoxes and find ways to navigate them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ruard. So we would like to finish it at 12:30. So now it's 11:45, and we are left with 3 speakers, and 15 minutes each would suffice. So there are one issue as well, that whether we would open the floor. But there is also a solution, because most of our distinguished panelists would be also in technical sessions. So we'd not miss them. So what I would now do, I would request my teacher, Professor Wahiduddin Mahmood, because I won't be able to give whatever introduction he requires. So I would just stop and ask him to speak about 12 to 15 minutes.
Own introduction.
No, sir.
Honorable Speaker of our Parliament, Honorable State Minister for Finance, I'm not sure what to add to what has been already said by the distinguished panelists. Let me go direct to the main theme of this conference, which the evolving global order and what that means for countries like us. Now, the biggest stories in the present evolving global order is of course about the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war, the rise of China as a contending superpower, and its Belt and Road Initiative, the US-China trade war, which in fact started even before the Ukraine-Russia war, and the formation of BRICS as a group and other regional trade groups and so on. These are the big stories. I'm interested in the perspective of countries like ours, which are, shall we say, low income, and we are low middle income countries, which are not much discussed in these big stories, but we are on the receiving end. And I think one of the purpose of this seminar is to have the perspective of those countries. To start with, countries like ours, we had resentment about WTO, World Trade Organization. So the negotiations were, that was started by few decades ago, in mid-80s. Now, WTO has played its role, and there is not much prospects of its further progress. Although we had grievances against WTO in terms of that we, vis-a-vis the industrialized countries, we were a bit given a worse deal, developing countries. But even then, the advantage for us was that it was a rule-based arrangement. The rule-based arrangement means that the developing countries like us, which lack individual countries' negotiating skills, they can rely on whatever rules there are available to them. The scenario, given that WTO progress is not in sight anymore, more negotiations, the scenario that has been more complicated by the tilt towards national trade policies in the nationalist trade policies in the industrialized countries, which is a sort of economic nationalism, rise of economic nationalism in the West, particularly in the US. We can see that in the US withdrew under Donald Trump from what was called TPP, and the President Biden administration is even less, is not enthusiastic about a far less form of less comprehensive Asia-Pacific economic formation, which is called EPEF. Instead, US is interested in, US is a big market, and we are interested in what they are doing. It's interested in having limited bilateral deals with countries like Philippines, like even Vietnam and Indonesia. So, whereas China, on the other hand, is going for larger economic formations on its own, economic cooperation formulations. We are left out of that still now. And so all that means is that the developing countries are increasingly left to themselves to negotiate and explore its global economic opportunities. The opportunities are there, but we have to individually explore them. So one lesson is that we have to develop our economic diplomacy skills, each country. Even in the rule-based WTO system, the countries like ours had to safeguard whatever advantage was given to us. For example, we didn't notice that during, after the Rana Plaza incident in 2013, the US withdrew its GSP facilities for Bangladesh. It was quite a noteworthy punitive measure. We didn't feel that at that time, because our garments export, which is our main export, was not in any case having duty-free access to the under WTO to the US market. But GSP facilities by US is given to 80 or 90 countries plus all the LDCs, which means almost 150 countries. Bangladesh was singled out of GSP. At that time, it didn't matter. But we have other minor exports to US, which has the potential of growing larger, so that unless we get back that GSP, the possibility of export diversification in the large US market we are losing. So we have to remember that. Now we are about to graduate from the LDC status, and we are talking about EU's GSP Plus, which has many conditions of abiding by the global conventions. For example, Pakistan recently qualified for GSP Plus, which is a unilateral EU's trade concessions to developing countries. Pakistan got that only by ratifying a number of international conventions, and also it will be reviewed every year. So these are stringent conditions of getting unilateral trade concessions from the Western developing countries, and we have to be mindful about that. Obviously, one lesson about this big global crisis like Ukraine-Russia war is that we have to be more prepared for that in terms of, say, having adequate exchange rate reserves. India didn't have any problem in coping with that because India had 500 or 600 billion, had accumulated billion of reserve. Compared to the Ukraine, the fallout, economic fallout of the Ukraine war, the more important for the global economy is the US-initiated trade war with China, which may be less visible, but it will have much far-fetching polarization and impact on the global economy. Obviously, any trade war, even by theory of economic trade, is not a good thing. It affects particularly the countries directly which are at war, trade wars. But it also, given that China is the largest trading economy in the world and is the second largest economy now, US obviously is leading, and China is contending to be a superpower. Now, any trade war between them means a new, that is the evolving global pattern. A new polarization is happening, and that's not in general good for developing countries, but there are some opportunities, like there are many Western companies which are leaving China, is looking for new home. And if you are prepared for that, like Vietnam, Indonesia, they could get more of those diversion of Western investment from China to those countries. And unless we are prepared for that, we cannot take that advantage. And how much advantage you can take from the trade diversion from China depends on the types of goods and the technology intensity of the production. And this, of course, shows that the entire global economy is now much more connected through supply chains than during the past Cold War of the post-World War II Cold War. And even if with many trade wars, the global economy will remain connected much more than it was before, and therefore there will be more risks as well as more opportunities for countries like ours. Now, what challenges countries like Bangladesh face, how to balance between our economic relationship between China bloc, which also includes now Russia, and the industrialized West. On the problem of trade partnership with China is that it has asymmetries. I mean, China is hardly a destination of labor-intensive manufacturing exports from developing countries, because China itself is not yet a developed country, so it competes with us in with developing countries in exporting industrial manufactured goods to the West. On the other hand, China is an important trade partner for us because the developing countries can source manufactured goods at a much less, at a competitive price compared to industrialized West. Because China is a manufacturing, is such a manufacturing power with all the entire range of sophisticated manufacturing that it can export to Western, the industrialized West, as well as it can, at competitive price, export to us. So one of the problem is that China, we cannot depend on China as our source of destination of our export, but we have to be dependent on China, for Bangladesh also to some extent on India, for importing manufactured goods at a relatively competitive price compared to the West. China has an asymmetric economic relationship with us as well as most developing countries in terms of having large trade deficits. We are having trade deficits there. Even India has large trade deficits with China. So what are the challenges for us? The navigating your, I'm coming back and concluding to your main topic, navigating external economic policies in an increasingly complex global order, that is your title, will not be easy for the less developed countries like ours. A main challenge is how to conduct, as I said, economic diplomacy so as to have an appropriate balance between the industrialized West, on which we depend for our foreign aid, assistance, access to our manufactured exports at concessional rates, and so on. And on the other hand, with the Chinese bloc for importing manufactured goods at a competitive lower price, and also to have access to the Chinese fund, which is available in large quantities. And on top of that, there are regional powers, which further complicates the situation for countries like Bangladesh, like, for example, the two Asian giants, China and India, which are adversaries to each other, compete to promote their economic interests in the neighboring Bangladesh. And on top of that, there is another imperative for us, is that we have to depend, as being energy deficient country, we have to have appropriate relationships with the oil exporting Middle East countries, which themselves are in a turmoil, and we don't know to which direction their formation, political and economic formation is proceeding to. So China is important for us, as I said, for funding of our infrastructure, for our for importing manufactured goods. But China, in exchange, would expect the indebted countries to support its stand in international forums, which is this so-called vote, credit for vote policy, which may go against the principal stand of countries like ours. On the ideological front, China is trying to offer a development model to the developing world, which Mushtaq was referring to, which is a mix of market liberalization and state control, in which priority is given to economic growth over the Western concept of democratic values. But on the other hand, it remains that most of the less developed countries, particularly the ones which are striving to diversify and technologically upgrade their economies, have to have high stakes in their relationships with the industrialized democracies. The advantage of this, we know the advantage of having these relationships. Let me conclude by saying that the challenge for the less developed countries like ours is how to, I'm coming to the political economy aspect of it, is how to align the domestic political interests of the ruling regimes with a strategy of securing maximum global economic benefits for the country. Let me be brave and put this hypothesis, which has not been examined yet, which is that if a regime has legitimacy in the eyes of its own people and is confident in itself because of that, and if its policies have widespread public support, then it is likely to compromise its country's economic, country's external global economic interests because of its own domestic political calculations. সরকারের যদি জনগণের চোখে বৈধতা থাকে, আত্মবিশ্বাসী হয় এবং সরকারের নীতির প্রতি জনসমর্থন যদি থাকে, তাহলে দেশের বৈদেশিক অর্থনৈতিক স্বার্থ রক্ষা অনেক সহজ হয়। দেশের ভেতরের রাজনৈতিক হিসাব নিকাশের জন্য দেশের স্বার্থের বিষয়ে কোনো আপোষ করতে হয় না। Let me conclude by saying that it remains, as an economist, we must say that the challenge to tackle this evolving global scenario is to improve the quality of economic management, which Mushtaq has elaborately described, how that quality of economic governance, management is not necessarily the good governance of the propagated by the West, but something about the accountability at every stages of economic policy making or governance in itself. Once a developing country is able to raise the efficiency of its industries across both export-oriented and import-substituting industries, it can afford to go for trade agreements with without unilateral trade concessions, but can afford reciprocal trade concessions with other countries, with the partner countries. Vietnam, for example, in addition to being a member of ASEAN, has made bilateral trade and investment protection agreements with numerous countries, including Japan, bilateral economic arrangements, trade negotiations, trade arrangement with Japan, UK, UA, and most recently US, and with India and so many other countries. Mind this, the Western powers, particularly the US, could ignore the human rights issues in communist Vietnam, since they were not offering any non-reciprocal trade preferences, and also because of the geopolitical strategy of neutralizing the deep trade relations of Vietnam with China. Increasing labor skills and productivity is also important if the global competitiveness of labor-intensive manufacturing exports does not have to depend solely on the low wages of workers, which obviously does not ultimately help poverty reduction. So if we just depend on low wages and be satisfied with exporting manufactured exports like garments, by definition, through such export expansion, we are not removing poverty, because low wage does not, it's contradictory to poverty reduction. These are all important lessons. But let me conclude by saying again, stressing that political problem is that my Vietnamese economist friends, some of them, has told me that one of the reason for success for Vietnam's external economic relations. Bangladesh and Vietnam started completely at the same stage in terms of economic relationships, global economic relationships in the early 90s, but they are now much ahead of that. One of the reasons for that success is that government policies there have strong public support and can be put to scrutiny through public discussions. Of course, so long as the legitimacy of the communist regime is not questioned. But beyond questioning that legitimacy of the government, you can freely discuss, criticize, debate any of the economic policies they do. That transparency, that public debate in discussions, particularly involving foreign negotiations and making foreign alliances, is extremely important to safeguard best the country's global interest. Have I taken more time than I was allowed to? Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Now I would, without any introduction, I would request our Honorable Minister of State, Ministry of Finance, Ms. Waseka Aisa Khan, to deliver her a lecture as a special guest. We are really sorry for this.
Thank you so much. It is not going to be a lecture. In the presence of so many illustrious teachers, I am not an economist, I'm a political worker, and while I was coming to the program, a colleague reminded me of Albert Hirschman, one of the most famous economists not to have won the Nobel Prize in Economics. He published the Strategy of Economic Development in 1958. It has since become a classic in the literature on economic development. In that book, he said that development is a lot about harnessing hidden resources. Societies have many resources that are latent, hidden from view, but which, if harnessed, could lead to development. Thus, governments should create mechanisms that help harness such resources. That's exactly what has happened in Bangladesh. Honorable Chief Guest of the inaugural session of the conference on Development Studies International Conference, titled Navigating Development Pathways in the Evolving Global Order, organized by Department of Development Studies, University of Dhaka, and their sponsors. Honorable Chair, Professor Dr. A.S.M. Maksud Kamal, Honorable Vice Chancellor, University of Dhaka. It is always a pleasure and a privilege to be in the same podium with our honorable speaker, Dr. Shirin Sharmin Chaudhary, and as she is a mentor and an inspiration. Distinguished panelists, scholars from home and abroad, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the media presence, it gives me pleasure to address this conference. I extend my appreciation to the Department of Development Studies, University of Dhaka, for bringing together such a diverse group of stakeholders, including young, curious minds, to explore the intricate dynamics of development studies, particularly within the context of the complex challenges of our contemporary world. I would like to recall the greatest Bengali of all time, the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, whose dream was to build Sonar Bangla, where people could live with freedom, dignity, and prosperity. Following the footsteps of the father of the nation, our Honorable Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, has made remarkable progress in socio-economic development of Bangladesh over the last 15 years by harnessing many hidden resources. Bangladesh has a strong track record of growth and development, even in times of elevated global uncertainty. A robust demographic dividend, strong ready-made, strong exports, resilient remittance inflows, and stable macroeconomic conditions have supported rapid economic growth over the past decades. Bangladesh has reached lower middle income status in 2015. It's on track to graduate from LDCs soon. Poverty rate has been reduced. We have heard from the various panelists about these issues. I would not like to repeat. Under the visionary leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, present government has been able to complete various transformational mega projects like Padma Bridge, Bangabandhu Tunnel, Dhaka Metro Rail, and made substantial progress in raising per capita income. And also, these projects have had positive impacts on the GDP. Despite the challenges of COVID and geopolitical unrest disrupting the global supply chain and the economic situation around the world, Bangladesh has made significant progress compared to many of its Asian counterparts. If we look at one initiative of HPM, we can talk about the community clinic. Initiative including the vision centers in Bangladesh is a groundbreaking effort to provide essential healthcare services in rural communities. To quote Honorable Prime Minister, she, quote, "We have given priority to the grassroots for ensuring overall development of the country." The Community Clinic initiative has gained worldwide recognition. Its participatory and inclusive approach to achieving universal health coverage has been recognized by the United Nations. It is referred to as the Sheikh Hasina initiative, reflecting HPM's strong commitment to improving public health care and promoting equity in global health, in turn attaining development. The financial year 23-24 budget includes gender responsive budget, which is 34.37% of the whole. It also includes social safety net program, which is 16.58% of the whole budget. I was listening to a panelist speaking about anomalies between, the poverty rate and why households with females have less poverty, households with differently abled people have less poverty. Actually, the social safety net program addresses all of those. There are, in the program, it gives cash to households like which have differently abled members. Similarly, for households where are widowers, where are elderly members, etc. After successful implementation of Digital Bangladesh, Bangladesh is now moving forward with the vision of transforming itself into a smart nation. HPM, Sheikh Hasina and her team are working relentlessly towards the implementation of SDGs by 2030 and building a smart Bangladesh by 2041. A cost-effective, sustainable, intelligent, knowledge-based, innovative, fast, smart Bangladesh will be built on the 4 main foundations of smart citizen, smart economy, smart government, and smart society. As we reach new milestones in the form of LDC graduation, we are also striving to chart sustainable development pathways that are in alignment with the ambitious targets set forth by the Sustainable Development Goals. One such initiative which has been introduced last year is the Universal Pension Scheme. The latest manifesto of Bangladesh Awami League also states clearly the path which need to be taken to attain development. Despite the escalating tensions between global powers, energy scarcities, and the realities of climate change, we remain steadfast in our commitment to building a better future for our nation and our planet. Under the visionary leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, present government has taken different policies that promote investment, entrepreneurship, job creation, and infrastructure development. There are programs to improve access to quality education, healthcare, and skills training for our citizens, particularly those in the marginalized communities. There are infrastructure development to facilitate economic growth and improve connectivity within the country and beyond. For human capital development, for promoting inclusive economic growth and reducing poverty. There are targeted interventions such as microfinance, social safety nets, and support for small and medium enterprises. There is a strong emphasis on environmental sustainability and climate resilience. Despite being known as the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change, Bangladesh is also a global leader in climate adaptation. There has been investments made in disaster preparedness, afforestation projects, coastal protection measures, and climate-smart agriculture, among many. These efforts are crucial for safeguarding our development gains and protecting our people's livelihoods. We are actively engaged in international cooperation and partnerships to address global challenges, such as climate change, trade barriers, and the promotion of sustainable development. We are following the foreign policy to international forums of the policy that has been set by the father of the nation as friendship to all, malice towards none. This is for advancing the peace, security, and prosperity for Bangladesh. I again thank the organizers for arranging the first Development Studies International Conference 2024 titled Navigating Development Pathways in the Evolving Global Order. As we gather here today, I share my belief and conviction that this conference will provide a valuable platform for critical dialogue, interdisciplinary collaboration, and innovative thinking. Let's use this opportunity to exchange ideas, share experiences, and forge partnerships that will enable us to navigate the complex challenges of development in the evolving global order. Together, we can build a more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable Bangladesh for present and the future generations. Thank you all. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu, Joy Sheikh Hasina. May Bangladesh live forever.
Thank you, Honorable Waseka Aisa Khan, Member of the Parliament, for your valuable speech of informing different government initiatives in marching Bangladesh forward. We are eagerly waiting to hear wise words from our chief guest, a proud alumni of Dhaka University, Her Excellency Dr. Shirin Sharmin Chaudhuri, Honorable Speaker, Bangladesh National Parliament.
Honorable Chair of the event, Honorable Vice Chancellor, University of Dhaka, Professor Dr. A.S.M. Maqsood Kamal, special guest of today's event, Honorable State Minister, Ministry of Finance, Government of Bangladesh, distinguished panelists from home and abroad, guests from Bangladesh and abroad, academicians, researchers, students, development practitioners, media representatives, ladies and gentlemen, organizers of the conference, Department of Development Studies, Dhaka University, and the sponsors, Chairman of the Department of Development Studies, Professor Titumir. Assalamu alaikum, a very good afternoon, Shubho Muddhanno. It gives me immense pleasure to be here at the inaugural ceremony of the Development Studies International Conference 2024. The conference brings together development scholars, bankers, practitioners, industry representatives, and policymakers together to disseminate existing knowledge, looking into potential areas for further research, to explore and unexplore and continuously evolving economic, political, social, and ecological fabric of the country and the world. We are discussing the topic, navigating the complexities of evolving global order for development pathways. It is extremely important to have extensive research on various pathways, identifying the specialized areas interlinked with development. Informed decision-making and policy formulation requires data and survey on different subject matters. I am happy to see that intense discussion will take place in the plenary sessions on development of pathways on various aspects contributing to the socio-economic development. Challenges of evolving global order today are many and rapidly changing at a fast pace. Geostrategic agendas occupying the main terrain and governing international relations impacting economics and politics. We live in a highly interconnected and globalized world. In navigating development pathways in evolving global order and global world order, we need to look around our surrounding situation in the existing world order. What do we see? We see economic recession, inflation, sometimes banks are collapsing as we read from newspaper in some of the Western countries, adverse effect of climate change, wars and conflicts leading to migration, and these are factors which determine world order to a great extent. More so, as we live in a highly interconnected, globalized world, we also see that 1% of the world individuals actually possess the highest wealth of the world. Poverty and inequality are all pervasive. Climate change, energy sufficiency, renewable energy, food security, development of ICT and artificial intelligence, technology are critical issues posing grave challenges to development. Bangladesh is moving ahead at a fast pace, and it is now considered as one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Bangladesh has moved out of the LDC status and going to become a developing country by 2026, which also will entail certain challenges with this transition that we have to deal with. We have to equip ourselves, prepare ourselves, adopt the right policies as we become a developing country and eventually a developed country by 2041. I want to pay tribute to the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, for his initiative to build a war-ravaged country that he started, and he only got 3.5 years' time. With the devastation and destruction of the war, there was hardly any infrastructure in Bangladesh at that point of time, any money in the bank, any food in the godowns or reserve. But father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib, within a span of 3.5 years, actually put in place the right legislative and policy framework to build his all very long dreamt Sonar Bangla and how to go ahead with it. He also promulgated the constitution, the written constitution of Bangladesh in 1972 within a short span of time, only within 9 months. In today's world order, we also see that there are multitude of challenges and conflicts of interest ranging from the working of different bilateral and multilateral systems and institutions, giving birth to the emergence of new forms of movements and struggles that put increasing pressure on geoeconomics and geopolitics. The two very known institutions, World Bank and IMF, which were the product of the World War, after the World War, the Bretton Woods institutions have been operating, but it also brings to the fore the question that with the present set of challenges in the existing world order, how far these institutions also need to undergo reforms to meet the needs of the developing nations. I would also like to share with you from some of the quotes from a legendary investor called Ray Dalio in his book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Why Nations Succeed and Fail. In this book, Ray Dalio identifies, from his own perspective of course, the cause of major shifts within the world order causing the change. And he identifies by saying, and I will quote, "I have learned that the biggest thing affecting most people in most countries through time is the struggle to make, take, and distribute wealth and power. This dynamic leads to a very small percentage of the population gaining and controlling exceptionally large percentage of the total wealth and power, then becoming overextended and then encountering bad times which hurt those least wealthy and powerful the hardest, the least advantaged segment of the society, which then lead to conflict and that produce revolutions, civil wars, and wars. When these conflicts are over, a new world order begins to be created, and this cycle begins once again, unquote. So, we need to take account of the factors that actually contribute to the process of the changing world order. In the face of escalating tensions between global powers, the rise of requirements of politics, and the urgent realities of climate change and energy shortage, countries in the global south, including Bangladesh, stand at an important juncture. The world's political ecosystem is now ever-encompassing, and it is not surprising to experience the repercussions of the ongoing Israel-Palestinian conflict, Russian-Ukraine war, and dollar crisis, living in a small but densely populated country, Bangladesh. Amidst these global complexities, Bangladesh managed to be a magical example within the global south under the long visionary leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The resilience of our people have led us to elevate to the next step. The country is set to graduate from LDC to a developing country. Bangladesh has completed a number of mega projects, namely Podda Bridge, and Podda Bridge with our own resource, of course. The Dhaka Metro Rail, the elevated expressway, the Kornofuli Bangabandhu River Tunnel, which have already started to add value to the country's economy and quality of life. Investment in the energy sector and deep sea ports and the expansion of the country's international and domestic airports have also created a degree of nationwide and international connectivity, which has visibly contributed to the enablement of Bangladeshi and international investors. 100 special economic zones are being created, inviting foreign investments. Bangladesh economic development has positively impacted key social indicators. Poverty has come down to 18% from 40% in the last decade. The country has 100% electricity coverage throughout, food security, social safety net protection. And within the social safety net protection, the poverty affecting the women have also been addressed through different cash incentives like widow allowance, lactating mother allowance, maternity allowance, which are especially for the ultra-poor women's protection, which has promoted women empowerment and gender equality. Kaushik Boshu has raising the question why the economy of Bangladesh is booming, identified women empowerment at the grassroots level as one of the major reasons resulting in the positive development. The literacy rate has increased to 74.7%, and the longevity has also increased. Gender parity in education has improved. Maternal and child mortality rates have demonstrably decreased. A large number of women are employed by the RMG sector, strengthening gender equality and pay parity within the country. Furthermore, an increasing flow of inward remittance from hardworking non-resident Bangladeshis contributed to the country's GDP. The expansion of Bangladesh's domestic consumption contributes immensely to the growth of the retail, real estate, and service sector. Honorable Prime Minister in 2008 and 2009 declared her Vision 2021 to make Bangladesh a digital Bangladesh. She has fulfilled that vision, and Bangladesh is now a digital Bangladesh. We have digital centers throughout the country in all the sub-districts. And now we are moving towards becoming a smart Bangladesh by 2041. Bangladesh's development journey serves as a model for other developing nations. The political stability, the parliament from 9, 10, 11, and 12, the consecutively strengthening and promoting democracy in Bangladesh, and also institutionalizing democracy has brought about the political stability which has given an enabling ground for expediting the development that has taken place in Bangladesh. Through the electoral process, there has been smooth transition of power within the constitutional framework. And this political stability has led to the economic growth and social progress. Therefore, the need for pragmatic fact-finding research to carry forward the iconic development trajectory is important. The discipline of development studies is spirited with its enormous capacity to foster critical examination and synthesis of existing development pathways, exploration and dissemination of development theories, models and policies through the formulation of development strategies that prioritize equity, justice, and environmental sustainability. By saying this, I will come to the conclusion of my talk. And before that, I just want to highlight one of my own observation as I was sitting here and listening to the distinguished panelists, which has been a truly learning experience. An interesting question came up, whether poverty is only confined to well-being and is a charity issue. I think the advancement of jurisprudence today shows that development itself is a right. Right to development, right to food, shelter, healthcare are all within the scope of the right to life. So, there is no possibility of confining these issues only within the periphery of charity, but these are rights, human rights. And the dichotomy between civil and political rights and socio-economic rights under the two international covenants have become blurred gradually. Ronald Dworkin's book, Taking Rights Seriously, and many more references in the legal and human rights literature support rights, jurisprudence, and it carves out the pathways for state responsibility to respond to the right of socioeconomic needs also. By saying this, I would like to inaugurate the first Development Studies International Conference 2024. I wish the conference a grand success, and I want to thank and congratulate the organizers and everyone involved in organizing such a worthy event. Let this conference be a springboard for action. Let us utilize the knowledge and expertise gathered here to address the pressing challenges of our time. Your participation, your dedication is crucial in shaping the future of development studies and ensuring a brighter future for all, and particularly for our present and future generation. So let us join our hands in marching ahead with Bangladesh in fulfilling the dream of our father of the nation of building a Sonar Bangla and a developed country, a smart Bangladesh, under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina by 2041. And let us earnestly work towards achieving that goal, as tomorrow must be better. Thank you for a patient hearing. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu. May Bangladesh live forever.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Guest, for your guiding thoughts, and particularly the discourse brought from the rights discourse to the area of and the realm of development studies. That itself really gives us a guidance to walk and move forward. Thank you for that. Now I would like to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, who has been navigating our second century journey of Dhaka University, and as an academic he has been coming up with master plan and other areas. We are squeezed by time, but definitely I am sure our Honorable Vice Chancellor, who is the chair of the current session, would shed light and give us his thoughts.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Rashid Al-Titumir. We already squeezed the time and moving ahead of the time. So I think I will take a couple of minutes to conclude my presentation or to conclude my speech. It's an honor and privilege to me to be the part of such a focused and brilliant gathering of the experts working in the field of development, economics, and social justice of home and abroad. It is with great pleasure that I extend a warm welcome to our esteemed chief guest, Dr. Shirin Sharmin Chaudhury, MP, Speaker of the National Parliament of Bangladesh. Your presence here today adds immense value to our gathering, and we are profoundly grateful to you for your participation. During your speech, you mentioned the success stories of Bangladesh in the area of the economic success. I would like to extend my heartfelt welcome to our respected special guest, Wasaka Aisha Khan, MP, State Minister of the Ministry of Finance of Bangladesh. We are privileged to have you with us. In your delivery also, you mentioned the success stories and the different initiatives government has taken in order to manage the financial management or financial market or economic market. Many thanks are to all the distinguished teachers, researchers from various universities. Your expertise and dedication to knowledge have significantly enriched our academic community. We are truly honored for your presence. Many thanks also to the beloved students, though I see the few students here in this today's session. I think tomorrow a good number of students will be here because tomorrow there are around 30 papers will be presented in the conference, and I think at the time student participation will be larger than today. Members of the media joining us today, your participation is invaluable, and we extend our warmest welcome to you all. So far we came to know the delivery from our distinguished panelist, Dr. Wahiduddin Mahmood, who was the former advisor and caretaker government of Bangladesh, then Dr. R.R. Genjibord, Rector, International Institute of Social Studies, Dr. Joe Devine, Associate Pro-Vice Chancellor Research, University of Bath, United Kingdom, Dr. Mushtaq Khan, Professor, Department of Economics, SOAS, University of London, and I hope by the end of the day, Dr. Zhang Zhongjiang, Dean and Distinguished Professor, Tianjin University of China, will join. Our distinguished panelists particularly discussed on the financial management, trade and commerce, interaction between the politics and economy, customization of the governance, particularly suitable for the developing country, challenges of digital divide related to the transparency of economy and other sectors. So I think our participants were enlightened in mass based on your diverse lecture you provided in the plenary session 1. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure to witness the Department of Development Studies, the University of Dhaka, organizing its first ever international conference with such auspicious gathering. The conference, which is themed Navigating Development Pathway in the Evolving Global Order, will serve as a platform for the insightful discussions and collaborative endeavor towards sustainable development. This gathering is a testament to the spirit of collaboration, learning, and progress that defines our academic and research community. As we come together, let us take this opportunity to exchange ideas, foster meaningful connections, and work towards a brighter future for our nations and beyond. I am sure we are well aware of the development It is a multifaceted concept subject to differentiating interactions and approaches. During the talk, our chief guest particularly mentioned the nature of the development. In the global context today, there is a collective acknowledgement of the imperative of inclusive development, wherein all segments of society are actively engaged. Moreover, the emphasis on sustainable development underscores the importance of equitable distribution of benefits, longevity of progress, and resolution of conflict with the ultimate aim of fostering peace worldwide. Thus, inclusion emerges as the essential root of development, while sustainability represents an overarching objective, embodying meaningful progress for present and future generations. As we speak here today, let us not forget the development paradigms, once confined to local and national spheres, has assumed a transcendental resonance, acquiring global significance. Despite geopolitical and cultural difference, we are interconnected on a planetary scale. This interconnectedness is evident in phenomena such as El Nino effect, happening by heat wave in our country by the last couple of days, and far-reaching impact of climate change, which disproportionately affect countries like Bangladesh, Maldives, Sri Lanka. If climate change, particularly this is my area since I am an environmental scientist, so if climate change augurs a world of more frequent and intense shock, sustained episode of fast economic growth, so-called growth miracles, will become harder to pull off. The result will be fewer poor countries succeeding in covering on rich countries' income levels compared to a world without the climate change. This comes at a time when convergence has become more commonplace since the start of the 21st century. Dimmer prospects of economic convergence are exacerbated by the weak institutions that characterize today's poorest countries. Institutional weakness is associated with deeper growth decelerations, which implies that poor countries face a harder road to recovery after any given shock. In these connections, we see that green growth, carbon taxes, carbon marketing are the few words to trade off green economy between high-emitting and less-emitting countries. But hardly we have seen any progress in this context. In order to overcome this type of climate change problem, our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina came up with Delta Plan for this century. So this is not only the plan considering the climate variabilities or physiography of the country, this plan is also called the techno-economical plan of the country. And by the implementation of this plan, it is expected that, and it is proved that we will have the sustainable development, particularly in the area of the infrastructure and other development, particularly for economic growth, as our chief guest mentioned that, related to our 100 economic zone of the country, that should address also the climate change aspect. Similarly, conflict of one part of the world reverberate globally, as seen in the economic instability caused by the events such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict and genocide taking place in Palestine. The deep-rooted crises of Middle East have ripple effect, compelling distant regions like Europe to grapple with challenges such as the emergence migrant problem in one hand and supply chain problem, particularly in the global south. In this era of globalization, characterized by rapid social, political, and economic changes, the imperative is to chart a sustainable and inclusive development trajectory. Bangladesh, amid its myriad challenges, exemplifies the complexities of navigating such global dynamics, notably through its sheltering of Rohingyas facing genocide in Myanmar. Against this backdrop, our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina set Vision 2041, and achieving this vision demands the concerted efforts of every sector of society, particularly our skilled and educated youth, in the era of demographic dividend and successive waves of industrial revolution. The Department of Development Studies is a comparatively new addition to the University of Dhaka. This department has been established to facilitate the dissemination of academic and research-based knowledge on development within the context of take-up economy like Bangladesh. I believe this first international conference on development studies is a testament to the department's ongoing commitment to academic innovation and global engagement. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all who have contributed to the organization of this conference, including scholars, sponsors, and esteemed guests. Your dedication and active participation are invaluable, and I wish the first Development Studies International Conference, DSIC 2024, organized by the Department of Development Studies, University of Dhaka, sounding success. And good number of organizations, particularly Citibank and the Bonik Barta, came forward to make this conference successful. I offer my extended thanks to Bonik Barta and also Citibank to provide all our support to make this conference successful. And finally, as the Vice Chancellor of the university, I would like to express my concern to the community, particularly we have the foreign guests, distinguished guests, and policymakers of the country. We would like to make a transformation of the university from a certificate-giving university to a research-intensive university. For that purpose, we have taken a lot of initiatives in the university, particularly to have the industry-university collaboration and to engage with the foreign university much more in order to exchange our colleagues, our students, and also include the foreign researchers and foreign colleagues or foreign faculties with the research activities of the University of Dhaka. So in that initiative, I would like to get support from all corners of home and abroad. And today, the second and third plenary session will be happen, as I came to know that more than 13 discussants will take part in the plenary session. And as I mentioned earlier, around 31 papers will be presented tomorrow. At the end of this seminar, I do hope that this will not be confined within this room. This seminar will not be confined in the booklet also. I think decision maker will be influenced by this seminar, and the organizer should have to take all initiative how to influence the decision maker in order to integrate the decision into the policy. If this thing happens, then I believe this international conference will be a big successful one. With this word, I would like to offer my thanks to you all present in the today's session, and also would like to offer thanks who will join tomorrow. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu, long live Dhaka University, long live Bangladesh.
Thank you, Honorable Vice Chancellor, for your kind words. We would finish this session by having our book, which is 50 Years of Nation Building, written by our colleagues, to be launched along with the chief guest and other dignitaries. May I request our chief guest, special guest, chair, to launch the book. Sure. May I request my colleagues to be, if our chief guest permits.
Thank you, Professor Titumir, for being such a great moderator. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, can we have a round of applause for such an insightful session? The session was on navigating the complexity and evolving global order of development pathways. We will have our next panel discussion at 2 p.m., where we will be discussing about the fiscal and monetary policies in the evolving economic orders, risks and vulnerabilities and solutions. As our honorable speaker has mentioned, we need to address them for growth and development. In the following session after lunch, we will have great minds from our financial sector. We all know that our financial sector is going through a reformation, so we need to understand our economic orders. But as in the former session, Dr. Joe Devine left us with a question, where we will go and why. But right now,